people are awake. It's wonderful. So I'm mic'd. I've got the hidden mic. You guys got to pass the mic. We've heard a lot of talks today. If you have a look at the side monitors, we don't have it on the front monitors, but you have a list of the talks that we've had this afternoon. It's the most important point. You've heard a bunch of talks. What's the most important point for the panel that you've heard this afternoon? And then I'm going to ask the audience. We're going to need the front mics on.
Okay, sorry. What I would answer is that in this afternoon's talks, we're seeing the pragmatic application of the theory that the morning described. And in all of them, Randall's, mine, yours, we were talking about if we have this now, not these are the nice systems, etc., operationally, what does this do? And what we've seen is that in very limited ways, but in the ways they've done, they've worked. They've had an effect. They've done something that you wanted to see. And the point of monitoring doesn't improve outcome by itself is a fundamental truth. So this was the fact that if it's a smart monitor and applied in a specific way with an actionable action on top of it, all the speakers described the fact that well, maybe with the exception of the mimic, I missed yours because I was mic'd up. They demonstrated that, in fact, that there was improved functional outcome in real-world experience.
Great. Who else has something to say about what was important about this afternoon's talks? Please.
Can I just follow up on my comment about the population of intensivists and surgeons from this morning? Because what I think this afternoon I've learned is just how powerful your collective intellect and knowledge is, and how I'm curious about how that can be leveraged out into other places. I know you probably think you're just in the foothills, but you really are thinking very differently from a lot of the other areas of health and social care that I certainly work in. So,
Randall, you look like you're about to say something.
I was about to ask you a question.
Oh, no. Only when we switch roles.
Well, if I were able to ask you a question, this is the question I would ask.
Randall and I have done this before.
So you have spent as many hours looking at computer screens with vital signs and other clinical information in the past year as probably anyone in the world. And you have no doubt parlayed your deep experience and knowledge and the things that you saw on the screen into life-saving interventions. What are the things that you see when you look at those monitor screens that light you up and make you want to get involved?
Randall doesn't ask easy questions. So it's a sidebar to the conversation, but I'll answer your question. I sit behind a bank of computer screens, but I'm looking at 5 hospitals and 14 ICUs. I know that when I come in for a shift, I'm going to be doing something interesting. I don't know what it is. I don't know where it's going to be. I don't know which patient. But I know there's not going to be a lot of downtime because there's activity going on. What lights me up is the fact that I'm now working to the top of my license. I'm not wasting a lot of time, and I'm not wasting a lot of other people's time. So that for the very powerful professionals in this room, a reason to get involved, even at our level, is because, candidly, it's stimulating and it's fun. It's also really rewarding when you pull somebody back from the brink. What I'd like to have happen, as Michael points out, I want people to get to the brink. But sometimes they will, no matter how good the monitoring is. So I'd like to shrink my world down to just those patients. I'd like to hear from the audience for a moment. What were the things that you heard this afternoon that matter? Marie's, I can see Marie in the back, wants to say. No, we got to get you a microphone. And you better identify yourself.
Marie Chetta. I'm from the Huntington Medical Research Institute in Pasadena, California. What's striking to me is how time gets incorporated in the best way data is presented to us in a way that it hasn't been. And I think that's the power. So I think much of the data that streams by when I'm in the operating room, you know, looking at gazillion lines during a liver transplant, is just lost. It evaporates the seconds before. Yeah, you can go pull it back, but most of it is wasted. And when you have the hero monitor or you have the comics, then I think we start losing a lot of the waste of the data in the ICU, and I think that's something that's really important for me. And I also think that in response to your issues about being data poor outside the ICU setting, I think these kinds of displays and these kinds of integration of data will tell you very simple data that you can follow in the outpatient setting. It doesn't have to be, you know, the kind of data-rich information we have, but it certainly is something you can learn from.
I wanted to make a comment on that point, and that is that we're not just talking ICU here. And though one of the series that I showed was in a step-down unit, that was the thing. Michael DeVita, who's a very big proponent of medical emergency response team activation, argues that if you're sick enough to be in a hospital, you're sick enough to have continuous monitoring, period. So it's not enough just to be in the hospital and have a blood pressure taken every 8 hours. You should have a pulse oximeter or something. And that if this is the case, then our ability to assess the severity of illness of a hospital system and the effectiveness, by the way, of if you have new treatments that the group in the beginning we're going to talk about trying things, you'll be actually able to identify that, in fact, your systems are making patients better globally. And then you can do that as well. An outpatient, you just put a pulse oximeter on and use your smartphone, send in an hour's worth of data, and it could tell the doctor in the clinic the same thing. So this is not just ICU care.
And I suspect that's what Tim's brain is doing. You're able to integrate the way because you are staring at that in a continuous way.
Yeah, I want to follow up on what you just said, Michael. Is what you mentioned too is this concept of post-acute care, getting out of the hospital where really some of the money is, and needing to for us to go outside and getting the same data we get in the hospital, meaning the monitoring, on a continuous basis. And I just want to mention that it's no surprise that actually the vice president for medical devices at Apple is actually an anesthesiologist, Michael Riley, who's been hired there.
Formerly of Massimo and
yes.
Formerly of your institution.
Yes, because I think they understood also that we need to have people who know how to get the data and how to analyze the data and so forth.
So this is a big idea. Every one of us who works in the intensive care unit, every one of us has a few frequent flyers. We know their names, and we know when the ED calls, Mrs. Jones is back. We know that she's had a CHF exacerbation. She's been intubated. We're going to have to bring her up to the unit, put her on a vent, diurese her for 24, 48 hours, take the tube out, and then she's going to go home. So that paradigm, it doesn't need to change. It has to change. And we need to move the monitoring and tailor the monitoring to the needs of the individual patient. We know that the top 5% of patients consume about 50% of the costs. We know that the bottom 50% consume about 5% of the costs. We've got that middle band, and we would like to not have anybody going up, and we'd like to have people coming down into that band. But the only way we're going to do that is by changing our ideas about sensing and acting. Now, there are going to be privacy issues involved. What do you mean you want to track everything I do every day? Well, of course, most of us carry one, some of us carry two such devices that are measuring position and velocity, you know, and acceleration. Pardon? Well, she should have. I'm not going to give her my personal one. She can have the business one. But, you know, we are in a generation now, particularly the millennials, that are more than happy to carry devices that monitor them. I have friends who wear Fitbits and make sure they have so many steps each day and so forth. We need to use that shift in self-care and willingness to be engaged in care to actually change that monitoring and intervention idea. Because I don't think any of us want to see Mrs. Jones come back to the ED yet again. Leo.
So, I mean, just a follow-up to that. I mean, no one has acknowledged about the role that the social determinants of health contribute to outcome. And we're not collecting that much data continuously about the social determinants of health and behavior. And you have alluded to there are other ways of collecting this data and incorporating it. But I'm not aware of any group who has kind of worked towards that goal. And we're not going to be improving outcomes unless we also address those social determinants of health.
All right, so I have an assignment coming up for the audience. I'll get to Barbara in a moment so people can start thinking about this. We're going to take these mics and we're going to put them in the audience. And I'm going to ask everybody a question. And the question is, I want to know one thing, either you heard it today or you brought it with you, that you think is going to move the dial, that's actually going to change where we are from today to tomorrow. Okay? We're going to move it, we're going to pass the mic, and the deal is you're going to get the mic, you're going to say something, and you're going to hand it to somebody of your choice. That includes the MITRE people, you too, Beth. Okay? And I just want to go around the room for a few minutes and sort of see what ideas come out. But in the meantime, Barbara had a question. I'm going to take Michael's mic because we'll make that one of the first one. No, I'll take both of those, actually. We'll leave one up here. We'll leave one up here. Yeah, okay.
Slow to wake up. It's finally afternoon in California, so I guess I'm wide awake now. One of the things that was asked by the group this morning is what can the government do to change, to move the needle? And one thing that is frustrating to me is that when you spend $1 gazillion on these monitoring devices, you get zero enthusiasm from these same companies to approve anything. What if the FDA had a gold standard database, let's say, just of the worst arrhythmia alarms that would be life-threatening, and they ran every device company's algorithm and made them disclose their false alarm rate? You think that would help innovation and competition and get us better products? Because right now they're not sensitive at all in trying to improve, even when you spend gazillions of dollars on their equipment.
I think it's a great idea. I worry a little bit about studying for the test. But I think you're right. We need to involve that regulatory agency, the folks who generate devices, and somehow create a space that will encourage engineers and vendors and the public to say, can we try something new, because what we've got today feels a lot like it did in 1970, except it's now got colors on it and the screens are flatter. Okay? No, you get to hand the mic to somebody. Just pick a person. It doesn't matter. Just get rid of it quickly because I want to keep moving here. I want to know what's going to move the dial.
So I'm a data guy, and I believe in data. But I also am a little worried that we may be overestimating the ability of data to reflect everything that we should be aware of. A great example given by Michael earlier. We give the same information, data-driven information, to 20 physicians. We get 25 different theories about the data. And it's, in my opinion, this is not an accident. In my opinion, this is stemming from the fact that the data is just a projection of reality, and we'll never be able to measure everything about everything that we need to know. It's just going to be constrained with economy and invasiveness and other limitations. But there is this intangible knowledge that sits in your minds, the doctors, that you cannot even convey completely to others, that makes you really good at diagnosing patients and treating them, which we cannot possibly derive from data as accurately. Because if we could, you guys would be already retired.
You know, that would be wonderful. So that's a great idea.
But my question is, do we want to focus on building systems which are not data-driven? but data and human-driven. And we need to really pay more attention how to mathematically integrate the two streams of knowledge together. So the question is, do you agree with this? And do you want to join me on this trip?
Oh, Michael's got something to say.
Well, Arthur's my colleague, and he's always amazed that we can go to the bedside and I can identify stuff, and I say, well, I'm a doctor. You know, that's what I'm supposed to do. But the point is he's bringing in a very important point, and that is that there are many times where we can put in pre-Bayesian probabilities that totally change the performance characteristics of tests that we've known about for about 200 years. And so one of the things that we can do with physicians is to alter the pre-test probability in a very realistic moving average way that would markedly improve what's going on. And to a large extent, that's what we're doing as knowledgeable doctors at the bedside. Yes, I can do this, but this really counts as a test for this patient. For this one, I don't really care what you find. Same test, doesn't matter. And it has to do with our definition of what we perceive. And so to a certain percentage, identifying those qualities of the patient that determine the probability of something happening beforehand, which would be sometimes stuff that we're saying, et cetera, would just change your pre-test probability.
Yeah, and just want to add something on this, is that whatever the technology you bring to clinicians, one thing we should never forget when we have a new technology coming is that most of the time we expect the new technology to be perfect. So the way we assess the technology, we are looking for perfection. And so if we want to improve population, what we need for new technology is just to do better than we actually do, just a little better. And by just doing this, we increase and we improve the population's health. And then we go baby step by baby step. That's what happens with every technology. They replace us or they help us just when they do a little better than we do. And when we see the variability that exists in healthcare, I think it's actually pretty feasible to provide us with tools that are going to decrease the variability a little bit, just to do a little better than we do today.
So the way I put it, I think our vision, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people share that vision, is that we need to leave to the machines what the machines could do better. So a lot of the cognitive parts, that there's so much variation among the doctors anyway, I think we should rely a little bit more on the machines. And that will free us our time to do the things that we do so much better. So the compassion part, no technology is going to replace that. Talking to the patients, discussing about their preferences, no technology is going to... and I think this is where, as doctors and providers, as nurses, that's where we should focus on, rather than trying to look at all the data and try to come up with some fancy treatment or some roadmap for this patient.
Sounds good. All right, I want to hear from somebody else here. Go ahead, pass it to somebody. What are we going to do different? What's going to move the dial?
I love the closed loop thing for things that are simple. I think that has real potential to improve safety in the near term, meaning 2 to 3 years.
Sounds good. Pass the mic. Yeah, say something. We'll get to the guy behind. No, you're holding the hot potato. Say something. What's going to move the dial? What have you heard today that's going to make a difference tomorrow?
I think simply being aware of a lot of problems that we have today. Like, I had no idea that there was such a huge impact on your ethnicity or socioeconomic status on how you fare once you're in the hospital. So I think simply being aware of things like that is going to help us move forward.
Sounds good.
So my mind was blown by the closed loop thing as well. And I would just say that, yeah, for the simple stuff now, but what simple changes? I mean, there are self-driving cars, right? There are self-flying aircraft. So simplicity, this is the first step, sure, but you're going to get more and more capability, and that's going to scale. Automation scales, microelectronic scales. You know, there's suddenly some productivity, and if we can push early warning all the way back to the home, you know, or wearable devices, things like that, we're going to really have a much better functioning system. So that really boggled my mind. Congratulations.
Thank you. And just to follow up on this, I think once again, it's this concept of when you develop something, most people in research or technology development, they're looking for the holy grail right away. So they want to develop the best thing. Well, I think once again, the baby steps, you go slowly, with the easy, low-hanging fruits, and hopefully it leads to much more complex technologies at the end. That's why we started with fluid and hemodynamics, because fluid we cannot do much worse than what we do. The drug is self-limited in bags, and it has potential to improve outcome. While if you start with glucose and insulin, you are handling very dangerous drugs. You're not sure about the outcome. With propofol and this and depth of anesthesia, the same thing. Propofol is a narcotics. You're not sure about the outcome. So just go with simple stuff, and hopefully what we try to tackle is not the fluid management in the operating room. The issue we are trying to solve is to make device communicate. Once we break the barrier with one technology, then everything's going to be much easier, hopefully.
With regards to the fluid control, it had to be based on a strong physiologic clinical principle first, and so that had to evolve first. So that's a very good example of taking strong, basic physiology, proven clinically to be the case. In his case, stroke volume and pulse pressure variation for volume responsiveness, to show that you should give fluids or not give fluids. But we don't have so many really good examples clinically. We have a few, and the ones he took, which are wonderful, and I'm really proud of Maxime for what he's done, are the examples where we have strong physiologic validation for it clinically. So one of the things we may consider doing is doing a clinical mining, like data mining, and say, what out there do we know for a fact we can control well? And now let's see if putting those into algorithms would be useful.
And equally, what are the things we can control that are hurting patients that we're not aware of?
Can I ask a question? So one of my observations, and it's genuinely a question to the audience, so one of my observations was just how each and every presenter this morning and this afternoon is working in what I consider to be a really interesting and exciting ecosystem. So you're doctors, but you're working with engineers, you're working with multidisciplinary teams, you're working with people in universities, you're working with the private sector. So these ecosystems are emerging because of need. And yet when you look back at some of our training programs, they're not necessarily forging those kinds of ecosystems early on. Some are, some aren't. And so my guess would be, how could you get people coming through the system ready to do the work that we're all doing, and not have them be 50 or 60 or 70 before they arrive at a place where they're interested in this kind of stuff?
So that's actually a real problem, because if you read Steve Lohr's recent book, Dataism, he points out that the people who are actually doing something in this space either have gray hair like Michael or no hair like me. And getting the next generation of caregivers engaged in recognizing that their future doesn't lie with a stethoscope, but really lies in helping us vision a different strategy for patient care, yeah, that's a very big deal. So we don't really have a good way yet of creating those opportunities, and that's something we need to do.
Well, I don't know if that's true. Let me just say that one of the problems we have, Tim, with our gray hair is that we weren't raised in this new Generation X, and so we don't even know the approaches that they would like to take. I mean, like, what was it, McCain said, I use the Google. Yeah. So that's what he called it. So, for example, one of our junior faculty has created an open source, web-based people source thing to document how many ICU beds you have in your hospital by having people all around the world say, this is my hospital and these are how many ICU beds I have, in a somewhat of a game that they can assess what's going on. And this was done totally and completely, I don't remember whether they used Twitter or whatever, but it was one of these social media, and he's been working with a group at Carnegie Mellon that are into this sort of community-based stuff, and they have been able to get significant information going, and it's in an area I never even thought to go into. So maybe, to get on to what you were saying, maybe the reason that we aren't connecting so much is because the disconnect is at our level, not theirs. I do believe that there's a significant desire by the younger academic trainees to be involved in these things. We're just not using the right words or tools to involve them, because I'm quite impressed with their thinking when they get on task.
I've just been given sort of a 5-minute warning here, but I still want to hear some more from the audience. We're trying to focus on how clinical analytics can get to smarter hospitals, safer patients, and better outcomes. I want to know from you what you've heard today that's going to get us from where we are today to those very real and important goals. Marie.
But you also asked us to talk about things that we brought here as well as what we heard. And so what I heard here was, again, dealing with just enormous data sets that are taken at crazy different levels of resolution. But I think what we often forget is that there's much more information in little bits of data. So talented postdoc working with me from a single waveform can get much more information based on fluid dynamics. Other students working with us, single EKG waveform, if you analyze shape, can give you much better information than you think you can get by reading a 12-lead EKG. So we have to not forget about what's right in front of our noses as well as this large.
So we might not need more data, we might need better ways of analyzing it.
Yeah, so Jack Smith from the Department of Defense. I think what I heard as a common theme today is that the analytics provide us an opportunity for getting more usable information. And I think the challenge for moving the dial is how can we begin to use that information to get the technology out of the way of the doctor-patient relationship or the relationship of the healthcare team with the patient. And moreover then, how can we move that information support into the hands of the patients and their families so that they can make wise choices about the care that they're seeking and the kinds of lifestyle choices they're making.
Chris?
And, just one additional comment. There was a comment about social determinants of care, and DOD is undertaking a Healthy Base Initiative in which we're looking at just those things. How can we create healthy communities? How can we support healthy lifestyle choices as a determinant of health?
Christian.
This is Christian Reiser from MITRE. So I would offer to the panel, data is inherently historic. All right, we keep talking about its predictive nature and this sort of stuff, but what if we started talking about our questions that you clinically want to ask versus moving what would be highly forensic historical information around? And what would you do if you had a system that you could query into near real time or live with a patient? I'll throw that. So projected analytic versus collected data. How would it change our discussion?
I thought we just did that. When you're doing your data mining with a lot of data and you're trying to build models, clearly it's retrospective, but we only live in the present. There is no such thing as a future, and the past is only a memory. We only live in the present. Okay. So the data that we have that we claim is real time is just a moment before. Still, that's the horse we came in on. And what we've shown in others is that by looking at what has happened before, I can tell you exactly where you are at this moment in real time, and I can actually show you the future. The importance of the studies are that if you do the analyses that take a lot amount of time with the big data mining, you don't use the big data in real life. You only use the hemodynamic monitoring parsimony, a smaller bit of it that you can really link immediately. That's leverageable by health systems. They don't have to measure everything under the sun because you did. And what you need to do is you need to continuously be doing in the background because things will change. But I do believe that by definition, the reality is that you only can assess the past and you only can guess what the future is and you only live in the present.
I'll certainly beg to be corrected if I'm wrong about this, but if you think about what is desirable variability and what is non-desirable variability, what's desirable is the individual portfolio of the individual patient that needs to be considered, right? So if you think about the one thing that does potentially project into the future, it would be the addition of genomics to predictive monitoring. So the idea being you could look at the current state and then combine that with genomics and say, given what we know about this patient's genetic profile, this is what we would predict happen. Everything else, everything else I agree would be retrospective.
I guess, first of all, I agree 100% with you. That's another domain that I think probably would add further amounts of data that might actually be predictive. We talk about some of these laboratory-developed tests, for example, that appear to have some predictive or some risk assessment capabilities. So I think that would be yet another data point. But this also speaks to this idea of sharing data, which I think everyone here would probably agree that it would be nice if we should, whether it's the manufacturers of devices or just the individual projects that are going on at the various institutions, if we're able to share data and perhaps go after the same targets. That was one thing I thought about readmissions, for example. We all decided, the U.S. went after the moon in '69 or so. That was our huge project. We decided we're going to go after that, put all these resources in that direction. So we can't necessarily agree about perhaps what's most important. Maybe we sit down and decide, well, let's see if we go after readmissions, nationally, share data sets, et cetera, share best practices, share methodologies, for example. It's clear that we're in this space now where we're using machine learning. It's no longer Netflix and Amazon and others or Wall Street that's out doing this. We're in the mix right now, and the question is, that I have is, we should be able to share what methodologies are best. And then if we go after particular outcomes, let's share that so that we can all, CMS says, hey, here's where we'd like you to be. Let's all try to succeed. Admissions, CLAPS, you name it. But that initially focuses everyone's efforts, or lots of effort, on X. You can still do the discovery, which we're not going to not do. But I think if someone's decided that these are the goal things that we should be going after that appear to matter, then it'd be nice if we could all work together on those and share best practices, et cetera.
So that's a great idea, and let's parse that out a bit, because I happen to agree with you. How did we get to the moon in July of 1969? It started in October of '57 with Sputnik, and a coalescence of governmental, private, and civilian agencies saying, we have a problem. It advanced by John Kennedy articulating 1960, when he accepted the nomination, put a man on the moon. We devoted 5% of the nation's gross domestic product between 61 and 63 towards that effort. In fact, the effort wasn't realized until 6 years later in 1969, when we'd already started to drop the spending. So you're correct. We can, should, and I would argue must get together around something, our own moonshot, if you will, and be willing to get everybody on the same page, use whatever political forces are necessary to do that, make the investment, and share both in the achievement and in the pride of the achievement. But that's going to take people beyond this room actually saying, we have an opportunity, we have a need, this isn't something that simply should be done, it must be done. How much more time do we have? Beth?
I think that was a terrific finale. Thank you, Dr. And thank you to our panelists.